Islam is entirely compatible with British values and our national way of life, while Islamist extremism is not, and we must be uncompromising in our response to it. Because extremism is not something that can just be ignored. It cannot be wished away. It must be tackled head-on.
The UK's Home Secretary, Theresa May, denouncing radical Islamists. We're back for Hour 2 of America's Forum with Miranda Khan, J.D. Hayworth. Miranda, the UK has taken a stand saying it will no longer tolerate those who reject the nation's values of democracy.
Yeah, Britain says it will introduce measures to counter Islamic extremism rather. The measure includes an investigation into Sharia courts and a crackdown on extremist preachers. But will this be enough to stem the tide of radical Islam? That's what many are asking.
Joining us for more on this story, activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the author of the new book, Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. Ayaan, we thank you for your time. Is reformation of Islam the only way to really combat Islamic extremism?
I think it is the most important way. I think if you look at Islamic extremism as it's practiced by the Islamic State in Iraq, that military force is the first step. We need to stop them. But then we also know that the Islamic State is only one brand of all the extremists out there. And in order to stop them from brainwashing young people, we need to start talking about a true reform. And I think what the UK is doing now is a fast step. But the next step, and perhaps even more urgent, and what's going to take longer, is developing a counter-narrative to the Islamic extremism message. And that's what I attempt to do in the book. I attempt to identify 5 key concepts, precepts within Islam that need to change. And unless those 5 things are taken out of Islam, we will never have a religion of peace.
Ayaan, your views have kind of evolved over the years from the time that you released, I believe it was your first book on this topic. What made you change your mind?
Well, a number of things. I wrote the first 3 books before the Arab Spring. I saw the Arab Spring not in the way, some of the commentators saw it as the flower movement, like akin to the Eastern European movement. But what I saw was masses of people who wanted to live under secular law and were rejecting Sharia law, and masses of people who are fighting for freedom. It was the language of freedom that they were using. And I thought, ultimately it's going to lead to the right questioning, which is, if I'm not going to succumb to absolute power from the despot, why should I succumb to absolute power from the Prophet Muhammad or the Quran or the cleric? Women were taking to the streets and fighting for their rights. And it's not there. This is all just a start. But that made me very hopeful.
Ayaan, you mentioned the fact that there are 5 key amendments, 5 key reforms you believe are important to Islamic doctrine. We only have about 2 minutes left. Could you give us the 2 most important of those 5?
Absolutely. Number 1 is the attitude that Muslims have toward the Quran and the infallibility of the Prophet Muhammad and following their direction as if they're following the traffic rules. And then the second one is, of course, this investment in life after death instead of life before death. And we need to replace that with a message for life.
Well, obviously, the call for reform continues. And as Ayaan Hirsi Ali calls for reformation, she's got some company in the new president of Egypt. And from the United States, of course, our good friend Dr. Zuhdi Jasser out in Phoenix has been talking about this. We're going to come back and talk more about the book that Ayaan Hirsi Ali has authored, and also what is happening in terms of geopolitical reality. What's going on with Boko Haram in Africa and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and are there more threats of Islamic terror on the horizon? She's a lady who stood her ground through the years, ended up a member of parliament in the Netherlands, and now a celebrated lecturer here in the United States, in addition to being a noted author.
Takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing.
And,
thank you so much.
And that's why we want you to stay with us, and we will talk more about it. Again, it is worth noting, if you're just joining us, the name of the book is Heretic. And maybe we're going to get into that with our friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali, how she chose that name. But again, she asks or states why Islam needs a reformation now. That is the book. More with the author as she addresses not only the book, but some of the other topics she takes up in her new book. And we will get to that right after we pause for this time out. America's Forum continues on Newsmax TV. Stay with us.
Boko Haram, a brutal terrorist group that kills innocent men, women, and children, must be stopped. Hundreds of kidnapped children deserve to be returned to their families. Boko Haram wants to destroy Nigeria and all that you have built. By casting your ballot, you can help secure your nation's progress.
President Obama there calling on Nigerians to reject the violence of Boko Haram and instead cast ballots that would move that nation toward progress. As we continue now on America's Forum, we are pleased to continue our conversation with best-selling author and activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan, you hear President Obama. What is your take on how he confronts radical Islam? He doesn't even use the term in any speeches, does he?
And I think, and that's actually the problem, because if you refuse to talk about Islamic extremism, say the way the Egyptian president or the ambassador from the UAE is very clear that we're dealing with Islamic extremism, then you tie your hands and you reduce the options that you have only to military means. That means you're not fighting the battle of ideas, and that the extremists are winning in that sense. So I really wish that our president would change course on this.
As you're speaking, Ayaan, we are taking a look at video from Boko Haram, now holding aloft the infamously familiar flag of ISIS. What do you take? Is that alliance between Boko Haram and ISIS now a reality?
It is a reality, and it is in Nigeria. It is a reality in the Middle East, in Pakistan. It's a reality all over Africa. Even, you know, a part of China has to deal with the Uyghurs, who are also, unfortunately, being radicalized. So it is so global, and it is a movement that starts by appealing to common Muslims. You know, look at the symbol of the Boko Haram. There is no God but Allah. They hold up the Quran and they call people to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad. So sooner or later we have to address that. We have to persuade Muslims to say we reject jihad. There's a whole movement here in the United States that is all about rejecting Islamophobia and going after people for Islamophobic, and this is a mythical accusation, instead of going after the people who are preaching jihad and instead of rejecting jihad.
Well, mindful of that, Ayaan, we've got about 3 minutes left, and let's retrace your personal experience with Islam, what you believed as a younger person and what has happened in the intervening years.
Well, there was a time in about 1985, 1986 that I became a member of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and I used to believe in everything that, say, the teenagers who want to now join the Islamic State believed in. And I now joke and say, if back then there was an Islamic State, I would have joined it. So I was driven, and we were driven by our convictions. It wasn't the State of Israel. It wasn't American foreign policy. It was because we wanted to, you know, practice our religion as we thought it was in its most pure form. And that is why I think we need to address that before we can talk about changing hearts and minds.
Mindful of that, what changed for you in your life that brought about the change in outlook?
Mine was a gradual process. I went, obviously, from my father forced me to marry a man I didn't want, and I ended up going to the Netherlands and was exposed to an enlightened worldview that respected the rights and freedoms of me as an individual human being, and the rights and freedoms of women, of gays, and you know, a message of tolerance. And once I experienced that, I came to I started putting question marks on my religion, and I think that I am now at a place where I think there are more Muslims doing that, and we need to encourage that small group of brave Muslims who are, again, putting these question marks on their religion and encourage reform.
Ayaan, as a woman and an activist speaking out about atrocities within Islam, you've received several death threats. In the minute that remains, could you tell us how you handle the threats made on your life?
It's very clear to us that those who use the threat of force and terrorism to make their arguments are successful when we give in. And so my whole attitude is we should never give in. We should never give in. We should never give up. They want to put terror into our hearts and into the soul of what our civilization is made of, and that is freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the freedom to associate. And these are the things we must not give up. And the way not to give up, for me, is to continue to speak out.
And you're not only speaking out, you continue your writings, thus the new book entitled Heretic, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. Once again, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, we thank you very much for your time and for your insights. When we come back, threats by Russia against Denmark, we'll talk about it. Stay tuned.